So again, in this session, as we did in the corresponding session yesterday, we're going to move back into the compassion wing of the practice. Again, it's important to have balance in our practice. And unfortunately, it's often the case that people get into the Vipassana or Vipashyana practice and really put a lot of effort into this practice, but then they don't balance this with the compassion of the practice. And what often happens is that engaging in this sort of Vipassana practice, often people can get very self-absorbed and often become quite disconnected from the world, and often even become insensitive to the sufferings of others because they're so self-absorbed. And then in some extreme cases, then even think that because they're doing some high level Vipassana practice, then everything they do is with wisdom, therefore everything they do is okay, and then unfortunately engage in unethical behavior, believing that it's wisdom. So we want to avoid this, to have this balance. So we engage in the compassion wing of practice together as a balance with the Vipassana practice. And yesterday we looked at the Glen practice, a very powerful practice in the Mahayana tradition for cultivating loving kindness and compassion, also particularly powerful for overcoming this selfish, self-cherishing mind, transforming this into the mind of cherishing others. And as with the loving kindness and compassion practice, it's very much recommended to cultivate this Tonglen practice in stages. First, start with people close to us, most easy, slowly moving out to people we don't know very well, and then eventually to people we find very difficult, and then all living beings. But again, probably in our modern society, it's very good to have one more step in the process, and that is to start by using this Tonglen practice to cultivate loving kindness and compassion to ourselves. Because again, in our modern society, there seems to be this epidemic of low self-esteem and self-hatred. So if we're not kind and compassionate towards ourselves, it's almost impossible to cultivate that for others. So these are the steps. And so yesterday in the Tonglen practice, we began by doing the practice for ourselves and then someone close to us. So today I'd like to continue that and slowly move out further. And then after the meditation, I want to talk a little bit more about the Tonglen practice, particularly in terms of how we can implement this Tonglen practice in our daily life. And then also I want to talk a little bit about something we talked about in last weekend's retreat, the Shamatha retreat, about why we find it very difficult to have this loving kindness and compassion for people who behave badly, and also sometimes why we find it so difficult to have loving kindness and compassion even for ourselves. And so I'd like to talk about that because I think it's important. And so we'll look at that after the meditation. So first we're going to do the meditation again, the Tonglen practice. So make yourself comfortable. So as always, we begin by preparing the body, setting it into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. So a vigilant posture is one where we keep our back nice and straight. And then at the same time, allowing the entire body to become completely relaxed, completely at ease. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And setting the mind into a state of ease and relaxation by letting go of any thoughts of the past or the future, and simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the present moment. Simply focusing on the sensations of the breath throughout the body. So let's again use the Glen practice, the giving and taking practice, to help cultivate loving kindness and compassion, to help transform our self-cherishing mind into a mind of cherishing others. No matter how much mental afflictions, such as anger and jealousy and craving, confusion and so forth, are in our mind, beneath these mental afflictions is the natural purity of our mind. So imagine this inner purity of your mind in the form of a small white radiant sphere of light in the center of your chest at the level of your heart. And then allow your field of loving kindness and compassion to expand out to the person seated next to you. They are just like yourself in wanting to be happy and wanting to be free of suffering. So arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they were free of suffering and its causes. May you be free of all suffering and its causes. May you be free of all mental afflictions. And then imagine their mental afflictions and suffering in the form of black smoke filling their body. And then with each in-breath, imagine drawing that black smoke out of their body and bringing it into the sphere of light at your heart, completely dissolving it there. So with each in-breath, breathe in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their mental afflictions and suffering at your heart. Then imagine the black cloud is now completely extinguished. And now they're completely free of all mental afflictions and suffering. And take joy in this. And then arouse the thought, how wonderful it would be if they had happiness and its causes. May you be truly well and happy. And then with each out-breath, imagine immeasurable rays of light radiating out from your heart, filling their entire body and mind, and transforming into everything they need to be happy. So with each out-breath, breathe out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And then imagine that they've now found the genuine happiness that they seek. And take delight in this. And then allow your field of loving kindness and compassion to expand out further. And allow your mind to move around. And whoever comes to mind, whether it's a loved one, a stranger, or even someone who you find a little bit difficult, attend to them. Breathing in with compassion, dissolving and extinguishing their suffering at your heart. And breathing out the light of loving kindness, sending to them whatever they need to be happy. And allow your mind to continue to move around. And whoever comes to mind, whether it's an individual or even a group of people, breathe in with compassion, breathe out the light of loving kindness. No matter how much darkness is drawn in, it is all extinguished without a trace. And no matter how much light is sent out, it is sent out from an inexhaustible source that is in no way depleted. So continue to allow the mind to move around, breathing in with compassion and breathing out the light of loving kindness. And then release all appearances and simply allow the mind to come to rest. Resting within the experience of awareness itself. Simply being aware of being aware. Resting in the stillness of awareness. Does anyone have any questions regarding the Tonglen practice in general? Okay, then just a few points about how we can use this Tonglen practice in daily life in a sort of practical way. Of course, it's very helpful to actually do formal meditation on Tonglen, to really work on cultivating loving kindness and compassion and cherishing others through the Tonglen meditation. But also then we can use this same approach in daily life as well. And there are a number of ways in which we can do that. One, of course, is that once we are comfortable, we know how to do this practice, we can do actually the entire practice on one breath. So if in daily life we see someone around us who's obviously has some sort of physical or mental suffering, we can simply on the in-breath, we can take that from them. On the out-breath, we can send them happiness. So and we have plenty of opportunity in daily life. I think we see a lot of people in those situations. And related to that, what can be also very helpful is if we're about to meet with someone and we anticipate this meeting is going to not go very well, maybe we're going to get upset or react, or it's going to be a very difficult meeting we're anticipating. What we can do is, as we're actually physically approaching the person, do this exercise. take away their mental afflictions and suffering, give them happiness. Because if we do that as before we actually open our mouth, then more likely we are going to be in a much more receptive state. Because often when we're moving into a situation where we anticipate difficulty, we're already on the defensive, already wanting to defend ourselves. And then, of course, if that person says some little tiny provocative thing, we tend to react because we're in the defensive mode. And then maybe they don't have any intention. Maybe we're interpreting something in that way and we react. And then, of course, the whole thing goes out of control. So if we can do this exercise as we're actually approaching the person, we're going to be not in the defensive mode. We're going to be in a much more calm mode, more open, more compassionate state of mind. So it's more likely that our interaction will work better. So that's something we can do as well. Also, of course, what we can do in daily life is use this Tonglen practice for ourselves. Because what happens now, of course, is if we encounter some sort of suffering in our daily life, of course, what we do is we react to that. We go, oh, no, not suffering. I don't want that. Go away. And of course, if we have aversion to our physical or mental suffering, it doesn't go away. It just gets bigger. For example, an example might be, let's say we're the sort of person that maybe occasionally gets migraine headaches. So we get a migraine headache. And then, of course, normally what happens is when something like that comes up, we go, oh, not that again. I don't want that. That's just so much suffering. And as soon as we do that, we develop aversion. And all that happens is we magnify the level of discomfort we feel. So that migraine takes on much huger, much more bigger proportions. We feel much more discomfort because of the aversion. So what we can do, of course, with any situation where we are suffering is first stop the aversion, practice acceptance, because we can follow their great Indian master Shantideva's advice. He says, when we're faced with some difficult situation, if a situation can be remedied, why get upset? Just fix it. And if a situation cannot be remedied, what's the point in getting upset? Very simple advice. So if we've got a migraine headache and we can fix it by taking some medication, take the medication. If we know that medication doesn't really work, no point in getting upset. It's not going to help. It's just going to make it worse. So then we practice acceptance. So acceptance means acknowledging we have this difficult situation. We either accept it or we try to push it away and have aversion. And so with acceptance, then if it's fixable, fix it. If it's not fixable, just be present with it and don't magnify discomfort. So that's one thing we can do. But on top of that, we can use Tonglen practice. And we can use this difficult situation as an opportunity. We can have this as not as a problem, but as an opportunity. And what we can do is, on top of accepting, okay, I got a migraine headache, medication doesn't really work, I'll just have to wait it out, we can use this as an opportunity to develop compassion. Because we can think, okay, I've got this migraine headache, but I'm sure there are thousands of other people on the planet with migraine headaches right now, and maybe much worse than I'm experiencing. So by me willingly accepting this migraine headache, may all others be free of their migraine headaches. And so then we can even do this Tonglen practice on that basis by taking the migraine headaches away from everyone and giving them happiness and peace of mind. So we can use this difficult situation to cultivate loving kindness and compassion to others. And by focusing on others, there's less likely to have aversion, because aversion to our own suffering comes because we tend to become very self-absorbed. Usually when we're faced with a difficult situation, we become very self-absorbed and go, poor me, poor me, poor me. And then we just magnify discomfort and suffering. Whereas if we have a difficult situation, we focus on others, much less likely to have self-absorption, much less likely to aversion. And then we can use that difficult situation to cultivate compassion for others. And also, you might be surprised, but often, if we do that, the force of our compassion for others often subdues some, or if not all, of our own discomfort, because we're so focused on others. You know, how often do we hear reports about someone's been in an accident, car accident with their partner, and they've broken their leg or something, some severe injury, normally excruciating pain, but they're so concerned about their partner, they don't even notice the pain that they're experiencing. So similarly, if we can really focus on others, then maybe even the discomfort we feel from our migraine headache, it won't really affect us because we're really concerned with others. So this is how we can use this Tonglen practice in daily life when we're faced with our own suffering. Not to get self-absorbed, cultivating compassion, and maybe even subduing a lot of the discomfort we normally feel or experience. Also, of course, not just suffering, we can use this for mental afflictions. You know, if we have some mental affliction arising, some anger, jealousy, anxiety, depression, whatever's arising, same thing. Think, okay, I'm not the only person on the planet that has agitation or anxiety or depression now. Everyone, many people have this. So I'm going to take on all that anxiety from others and give them happiness. And that also can be a very potent antidote to becoming self-absorbed and really dwelling and getting caught up in that mental affliction. So this is how we can use this Tonglen practice in daily life in a very practical way. Okay, what I'd like to do now then is look at what we looked at last weekend in the shamatha retreat in terms of why is it so difficult to cultivate loving kindness and compassion to people who behave badly, and even sometimes why is it so difficult to have loving kindness and compassion for ourselves? Because maybe in that meditation, maybe someone came up that you found a bit difficult, and maybe you found this a little bit difficult to do with them. So why do we have this resistance? And this actually relates to what we've been discussing this weekend of Vipashyana, and this sort of came up a little bit earlier in our discussions. So if we see someone behaving badly, then of course the correct perspective is simply acknowledging there's a person who's doing or engaging in some harmful behavior. So this is the correct perspective. But unfortunately, often when we see these sorts of situations, we often don't tend to have that perspective. Often when someone is behaving badly, the perspective we adopt is there's a bad person, there's a nasty, horrible, evil person. So what we've done, of course, is we have fused the person to their behavior, because there's two things here. There's a person and their behavior. But by adopting this perspective, we've fused the person and behavior and made them one thing. So this, in psychology, is called cognitive fusion. Which, of course, is an invalid perspective, because there are actually two things here. There's a person and behavior, and we've actually fused them together and made them one thing. Now, what's the problem with doing cognitive fusion? The problem is that if we do cognitive fusion, which is already a false perspective, the problem is that in any given situation, we've basically got two options: accept or reject. And normally, of course, if someone's behaving badly, we reject. But if we do cognitive fusion and we fuse the person to the behavior, then when we reject, what we do is we reject the person. We attack the person. And if we understand that attacking the person is not the right thing to do, the only other option instead of reject then is accept. But then if we accept and we've done cognitive fusion, what we end up often doing is accepting their bad behavior. And so both attacking the person and accepting bad behavior is not very beneficial. It's not going to lead to a good result. And then, of course, when it comes to forgiveness or compassion, it becomes almost impossible. Because having forgiveness or compassion for a bad person feels like what we're saying is, oh, what you did is okay, I don't mind. Of course we should mind. But therefore, because we've fused the person to the behavior, it becomes almost impossible to have compassion or forgiveness for the person, because often we even feel like they don't deserve forgiveness or compassion because they're a bad person. And also the problem with this, doing cognitive fusion, when we identify the person with the behavior, then they become a bad person. And then it becomes almost impossible to acknowledge any good qualities they have, because bad people don't do good things. And if they do a good behavior, oh, they didn't really mean it because they're a bad person. So we can't even acknowledge their good qualities. So we have a completely biased, wrong perspective or view of that person. So of course the simple answer is don't do cognitive fusion, because cognitive fusion is a false perspective. There are two things. There's a person and a behavior. So the correct perspective is simply acknowledging there is a person engaging in harmful behavior. And if we have the correct perspective, then we can both accept and reject. We can reject the behavior. We can be very forceful about the behavior. We can address the behavior. And at the same time accept the person and have compassion for the person. And we can, with compassion for the person, we can help that person to overcome that bad, harmful behavior. And then also, of course, in the correct perspective, we have a balanced, correct view of the person. That person is engaging in a harmful behavior, but maybe sometimes they also engage in a positive behavior. So we can have a balanced, correct view of the person, being able to acknowledge both the person's qualities and their faults. So therefore, if we can stop doing cognitive fusion and have the correct perspective, then it becomes much easier to have forgiveness and compassion for people who behave in a harmful way, and at the same time not accept their harmful behavior, be very firm about their negative behavior, and help that person to overcome that negative behavior. So I think this is something that can be very helpful when it comes to developing loving kindness and compassion for others. But also the same principle can be very helpful in cultivating loving kindness and compassion for ourselves. And this, I think, is one of the reasons why we have so much low self-esteem in our modern society, is because, again, in our modern society, we tend to always focus on the negative. And also, with respect to our own behavior, if we're behaving badly, we don't often have the perspective, I have done a harmful thing. Rather, often our perspective is, I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person. And so if we do cognitive fusion with respect to ourselves when we behave badly, we end up in the same situation. Accept, reject. We don't like the bad behavior, so we reject. So what do? Is we reject ourselves. We attack ourselves. We get angry at ourselves. We have low self-esteem and self-hatred. Or the other thing is that accepting the bad behavior. And often we do that in terms of denial, suppression. I didn't do anything wrong. And also, therefore, compassion for ourselves becomes difficult because I don't deserve compassion because I'm a bad person. I don't deserve it. So again, the solution is don't do cognitive fusion. If we are behaving badly, simply acknowledge I have done a harmful thing. Then we can have compassion for ourselves. We can still feel good about ourselves and at the same time not accept our negative behavior and work to overcome our negative behavior. And this really highlights also the difference between regret and guilt. And again, in our modern society, there seems to be an epidemic of guilt. Where does guilt come from? I think it comes from this. Because if we've done something harmful and we feel guilty, what are we focusing on? Bad me. I'm a bad person. So guilt comes from cognitive fusion. So we don't need to feel guilty about anything because it comes from an invalid perspective. And guilt is actually completely useless. All it does is it makes us feel bad, it paralyzes us. It doesn't even address our negative behavior because it's all focused on me. Whereas if we've done something harmful and we regret, what are we focusing on when we regret? Bad behavior. So regret comes from correct perspective. Regret comes from simply acknowledging I have done this harmful behavior. I regret that behavior and I'm going to overcome that negative behavior. So again, regardless of whether it's another person or ourselves, if we can keep the correct perspective, then it's much easier to develop loving kindness and compassion rather than mental afflictions such as anger and hatred and low self-esteem and guilt and so forth. So I think this can be very helpful in terms of ourselves and others. And how this relates to our Vipashyana practice, of course, is in our Vipashyana practice, we've said that the fundamental ignorance, one way of looking at that is in terms of person, is we wrongly identify ourselves with our body and mind. This is me. Like that, we wrongly identify ourselves in terms of our thoughts, emotions, behavior, and so forth. So that is this, For example, often, if we have anger coming up in our mind, don't we often say, I am angry? So we've identified ourselves with our anger. It's cognitive fusion. And of course, then mental afflictions arise. Whereas the correct perspective is don't identify ourselves with anything in the body and the mind, is simply acknowledge, I have anger arising in my mind. The correct perspective. There's me and the anger that is arising in my mind. And so by not identifying with it, simply seeing it as an object, then we can address it. We can deal with it. We can work with the anger. But as soon as we identify with it, we've basically said, there you go, anger, you're the boss, away you go. So this also then can be very helpful in terms of working with our own thoughts and emotions and so forth, is simply to have that correct perspective. And that's why also the shamatha practice, particularly of observing the mind, is getting us into the habit of this, of being the observer or witness of all the mental events that are arising in our mind, and correctly seeing thoughts and emotions as objects arising in the mind instead of what we normally do is identifying with them. Any questions about any of this?
I was just thinking about how we raise the children. I mean, it's already there.
Yeah.
You plan this cognitive fusion already at the very early stage.
Yeah. Again, unfortunately, our modern society, the way we speak tends to promote this. Like you said, like a little child is misbehaving. what does often parent do? Bad girl, bad boy. I mean, it's a disaster. It's a really disaster. And of course, to overcome that, the parent often goes to the other extreme. Good girl, good boy. This is also a disaster, because also identifying on the positive side can lead to a lot of problems. Because if you say good girl, good boy, and often it goes more than that, you're special. You're a special child. I mean, it's a disaster, because then, oh, I'm special. And of course, they can never live up to that. And when they don't, they crash even further. And then, of course, if they really think they're special, oh, I'm better than everyone else. And then, of course, self-cherishing kicks in big time. And so this is a disaster. So also we know from our own experience, if someone is praising us as a person, you know, you're a wonderful person, what happens? Oh, yes, I am, aren't I? In fact, I'm better than everyone else. So again, it just feeds the self-cherishing. What we want to do, and we must do, because in our modern society, we're always focusing on the negative. With cognitive fusion, even worse. What we need to do, of course, is balance, is focus on the positive with respect to ourselves and others, but not with cognitive fusion. Don't praise people, don't praise yourself, because it just will lead to arrogance, big head, self-cherishing. What we want to do is praise others' behavior and our own behavior, correct perspective. So if someone is engaging in some beneficial behavior, praise their behavior. Don't praise the person. And if we are engaging in some beneficial behavior, rejoice in our behavior. Don't praise ourselves. Self-cherishing. So if we adopt the correct perspective, that's very helpful, because if you praise someone's behavior, that will encourage them to do more of that. If you praise the person, they just get a big head, thinking they're special. You're feeding their self-cherishing. Same with ourselves. So this is also important on the positive side, is don't do cognitive fusion. It'll lead to difficult problems. So we really need to change the way we think and speak, because as long as we're thinking and speaking like this, it's going to be hard not to identify.
So how can we recognize something positive in a person that they have done?
What do you mean recognize?
How can we recognize, show recognition for someone's good effort?
Well, you can praise their action. You know, if they've done something kind, you say, that was a very kind thing. Rather than saying you're a kind person, better to say, that was a very kind thing you did. You know, that was a very generous thing you did. So really focus on their behavior, you know, rather than the person. Same with ourselves. If we do something good, we need to acknowledge it. But acknowledge the thing we did, not ourselves. Don't say, I'm a very kind person. I'm a generous person. Rather, I really did a kind thing. I was very generous with that person. That's what we need to emphasize, because that's going to promote doing more of that activity rather than getting a big head. Same with other people. Anything else anyone would like to bring up? We've still got a little bit of time left in this session. If there's no more questions on this, then there's a few things I wanted to add in the last session, which I didn't have time, so I'll maybe bring that in. So now we're going to shift back into Vipashyana mode for another 10 or 15 minutes. So in the last session, we were looking at the fact of, in our Vipashyana practice, focusing on ourselves as a person. So of course, when we begin to investigate nature of reality, we don't have to focus on the person. We can focus on a cup, we can focus on the body, the mind, and so forth. But often it's recommended to start with ourselves as a person, or at least something within the body and the mind, because that's really where we start to go wrong. And again, remember, in the Vipassana practice, we are trying to internalize our intellectual understanding. So first, we gain a correct intellectual understanding of the view of reality, and then we bring that into meditation to come to experience that. Because what we're trying to do, of course, in the whole Vipassana practice is to overcome our ignorance and mental afflictions and hope then eventually suffering. And to overcome ignorance and mental afflictions, of course, that's our instinctive habits. We need to have something counteracting that. And intellectual understanding is not going to counteract that. Experiential experiencing this is going to start to create a new perspective experientially of how we see things. So that's going to start to reduce our wrong instinctive way of seeing things. So again, we need to meditate to come to experience emptiness, impermanence, no self, and so on, and thereby slowly overcoming our ignorance and mental afflictions. And so what I'd like to do now is another handout that you have, Mahayana Path Chart, is have a look briefly at how we progress in the spiritual path using this Vipassana practice. So the Mahayana path to enlightenment, we can divide into 5 stages. The first stage, path of accumulation. And what we notice here, the entry point into the Mahayana path, number 2, says uncontrived renunciation and bodhicitta. So to enter the Mahayana path to enlightenment, of course, we need to cultivate the aspiration for enlightenment, which is this aspiration called bodhicitta. So bodhicitta, of course, is the aspiration for enlightenment so that we can help liberate everyone else from suffering. So when we work on cultivating that aspiration to a point where here it says uncontrived, means, of course, now we can sit down and think about this, and for a few moments we could have a little bit of a aspiration, yeah, I'd like to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of everyone. And then after about 5 seconds that goes and we're back to our self-cherishing ways and I don't care about anyone else, me, me, me. And then we go back and we think about this again, oh no, really, I want bodhicitta. And then we keep working on that to the point where bodhicitta, this aspiration, is something that comes up spontaneously and continuously throughout the day. That everything we do has this motivation. When we get to that point, we have become a bodhisattva and we're actually on the path to enlightenment. So that's this point here. Then the first stage of the path, called path of accumulation. The word accumulation here means we're accumulating or cultivating the 2 aspects of the path, wisdom, compassion. So we are working on both of those on the path of accumulation. And similarly, the second stage, path of preparation, we continue, of course, to work on our Vipassana practice of emptiness. But on both of these 2 stages, when we work on our Vipassana practice and when we come to realize emptiness, in that experience of emptiness, there's still a sense of me, the meditator, realizing emptiness. So there still has a sense of subject-object duality. So that realization of emptiness is still conceptual, as it is now as a beginner. So now as a beginner, if we sit down and we meditate and we have some little experience of emptiness, this not finding, there is a sense of me experiencing this not finding. So there is still that sense of duality between me, the meditator, and emptiness, the thing I'm realizing. And that will be still there on the path of accumulation and preparation. The word preparation here means we are preparing for a direct realization of emptiness, meaning that we are here continually meditating on emptiness. And during this stage of the path, this sense of me in the meditation, in the realization of emptiness, this sense of me, the meditator, and emptiness, the object, there seems to be this gap starts to collapse. And then eventually it completely collapses at the end of the path of preparation. And we get to the third stage, the path of seeing. So what happens here is this sense of duality in the experience of emptiness completely collapses. And then we come to a direct, non-conceptual realization of emptiness. This is a very important point in the spiritual path. And it's often said that particularly from this point, we're on a one-way ticket out of samsara, no going back. And when we have this direct realization of emptiness, we become an Arya. There are two types of practitioner, someone who hasn't yet directly realized emptiness and someone who has. When we come to directly realize emptiness, we are called an Arya being. So an Arya is anyone who's already had a direct realization of emptiness. So here, on the first two stages of the path, we're simply called a bodhisattva. From here on, we are called an Arya bodhisattva, someone who's had a direct realization of emptiness.
It's the same as Arhat?
No.
No. Okay,
No.
thank you.
No. So on the path of seeing, that direct realization of emptiness is now strong enough to start to wipe out ignorance. Before that, on these two stages, the conceptual realization of emptiness was strong enough to sort of keep the lid on the mental afflictions a little bit. So here, what you'll notice, and maybe even a bit in our stage, is that our conceptual realization of emptiness is enough for some time after meditation to keep the mental afflictions dormant, that we feel more calm, less mental afflictions, and so forth. That's due to the power of the conceptual realization of emptiness. So that is happening here, particularly on the path of preparation. That conceptual realization of emptiness is now strong enough to really subdue or keep down the mental afflictions manifesting, such that here, in daily life, if a mental affliction arises, it's very weak and it lasts a very short time, gone, because of the power of it. But we haven't got rid of anything yet. We're just sort of keeping the lid on it. Whereas here, due to the power of the direct realization of emptiness, now we can start to wipe it out, but only the most superficial levels. Then we go into the fourth stage, path of meditation. Here the word meditation, of course, is coming from the Sanskrit word bhavana, and bhavana means to cultivate, familiarize. So on the path of meditation, we are continually familiarizing ourselves with the direct realization of emptiness again and again and again, continually wiping out more and more layers of ignorance. Path meditation we normally divide into 9 stages. Those 9 stages plus the path of seeing together are often called the 10 grounds or the 10 bhumis. And over these stages, we're wiping out more and more subtle layers of ignorance and mental afflictions until we get to the end of the 7th ground here. And at this point, we've wiped out all ignorance and mental afflictions. We've actually achieved the goal of nirvana. So technically, we've become an arhat. But of course, we're on the Mahayana path chart. Our goal is enlightenment. So nirvana is sort of a byproduct. We sort of keep zooming through that. Because over these last 3 stages, there's still some work to do. Because even though we've got rid of all ignorance and mental afflictions, we still have these what's called subtle stains of ignorance in our mind. This is what's causing this mistaken dualistic appearance to begin with. So even someone who's achieved nirvana and arhat, when they look out on the world, also to them, the world appears to exist independent of them. But because they've realized emptiness, they know this appearance is deceiving them. They never believe it. So it doesn't cause a problem. But this stain in our mind that causes this mistaken dualistic appearance is still there. Very difficult to get rid of. That's what we're getting rid of over the last 3 stages. And then here at the end of the path of meditation, we sit down for the last time, directly realize emptiness, and that wipes out the last subtle stain of ignorance in our mind. In the very next moment, we're still realizing emptiness directly. The whole phenomenal world appears to us. So someone who's enlightened is directly realizing emptiness and seeing all the phenomenal world at the same time. What that really means is, for us, unimaginable. But an enlightened being can do this. So this is stage 5, the path of no more learning. So this is the enlightened state. We've become, the Arya Bodhisattva now has become an Arya Buddha. So that is super quick summary of the Mahayana path. Any questions about that before we go for another tea break?
How much does it cost?
How much does it cost? Unfortunately, it's not for sale. You can't buy it, except in terms of effort in practice.
How many Buddhas have there been? I mean, according to the text, there are some others.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Of course, there have been many people who've achieved enlightenment, but how to know? That's an interesting question, because actually, someone who's really progressing on the path, who's really becoming more advanced, one of the qualities that we develop as we progress in large amount is humility. So the further we go, the more humble we become. So if someone's high on the path and you ask them, you know, are you a high-level bodhisattva? They'll go, I can't even meditate very well.
That's what they say.
No. So if someone says, if someone in public is going around going, I'm enlightened, I'm a 10th level bodhisattva, pretty high chance they're just delusional. You know? So if someone in public is really boasting about their level of practice, be very careful. There's a high probability that they're just completely delusional.
It's amazing when you had the luxury to hear the Tibetan teachers, and they always say, I actually don't know anything about this, and I was so lazy during the teaching that but I remember a little bit. So
Yes. Anything else? Otherwise, we'll take another tea break. Okay, let's take a 15-minute tea break. After the tea break, we'll come back and one last meditation, and then also talk a little bit more about integrating all of this Vipashyana practice into daily life. So that's still to come. So let's have a tea break first.